show you why.
Something with sage leaves, doesn't it?
It does, yes, yes. So just for the benefit of the recording, these are my mushrooms. But unfortunately, my masking fluid was really old because I don't think I've used it since we last had a watercolour lesson. So I couldn't get it out, so I couldn't get it off then. But anyway, as you can see, what I've done here, I've used masking fluid, and it makes for quite an effective gill, or whatever Jack calls them. I can't remember, but it's a big long word. Obviously the Latin word for it, I think. So yeah, so we don't have these sage leaves or anything, unfortunately, but we do have leaves. So it's up to you, and if you're listening at home, obviously it's up to you to sort of grab some mushrooms and some leaves from the garden or whatever, or your walk, and then just put them all together, and then we can create this still life. I think it's quite apt, actually, mushrooms at this time of year. So yeah, so that's what we're aiming to do today. So what I'm going to do now, obviously you're all returners, and I've just explained, just for the benefit of the recording, just explain to the group that if you want to just crack on and not go through this, then that's fine. You know, just make your still life and just go ahead. But I'm just going to just add a little sort of little memory jog. You know, how to go about how I constructed the mushroom. So I'm just going to just sketch a quick mushroom out of here. And I'm going to work out how and where I'm going to pop that masking fluid. Okay, so it does look a little bit odd at the moment, but that's fine. Can everybody see that? Is that okay? Masking fluid is my favourite thing for watercolour, that's for sure. That reminds me of Billy. Okay, so just using the other end of my brush, I will put some around the edge. You can get what I used on that when I did that at home. I used some. I've got a watercolor pen. Watercolor pen. What am I talking about? A masking fluid pen, and I do like the masking fluid pen. If I'm honest, it's quite nice. Well, mine dried up, obviously, but when I turned the nib round, then it was okay. So what I've done now, you know, with the benefit of hindsight, is I've turned it back around to the dodge a bit. So I'm trying to make these a little bit varied. There's a couple just going off here, a little bit here. You don't have to do exactly what I'm doing, obviously, but you know, look at your mushroom, check where all the white spaces are. And hope for the best. I mean, you know, do it very carefully. So I don't know if you want to do this mushroom yourself now, if you want to have a little go, obviously when I finish this demonstration, because I've got to let this dry, and you'll have to let yours dry. So I would maybe suggest perhaps just creating your own hypothetical mushroom, whilst, you know, virtually waiting for paint to dry, really, sort of figuratively, but, you know, for not far from literally. What I'm going to do for the recording, I'm going to pause the recording now because, like I say, nobody wants to watch paint dry. Okay, so I've just drawn another top of the mushroom here so that I can show you how to colour that in as well. Colour that in, paint that in. Brushes at the ready. Okay, so we're going to do wet and wet. So I'm going to start with this one actually. So I'm just going to wet the whole thing. Okay, so you can either do that with me because obviously we're not touching the masking fluid. And then make a nice, don't make it, obviously when we do wet and wet, we don't want it to be too pooled. I think that's just right. Sometimes it's difficult to tell. We don't want a big puddle, but we don't want it too, just a little bit too much there, I think. Okay. And I'm going to go over with some yellow ochre. Make that quite thin, and I'm going to just drop that in, and that should spread quite nicely.
Forget mixing the ochre and the I just suddenly thought. Just got my favourite. I do bring some in. Oh, have you got any? Well, that's what Lisa said. I know, fantastic. Yeah, get it in. Just imagine what our art will be like. I can imagine much. I won't be used to it in a month.
So whilst that's still wet, we'll just take a little bit of the burnt umber, and then we'll just put a little bit of that just down the side. And it should merge in quite nicely. But always remember, when we do wet and wet, that the layer that we're putting onto the layer has to be slightly thicker than the layer below if we want to avoid the dreaded cauliflower. So what we can do with this as well is we can, the nice little trick that I sort of learnt, is with a nice clean brush, if we can actually, we can move this around a little bit as well. Okay, so if you wanted to move it around, but it will naturally progress anyway. So. And then I'm just going to add a little bit more. I need to stick this burnt sienna on. Sorry, you've got that burnt sienna and I don't. Don't worry, it'll always dry lighter, so it'll always dry lighter. And then you can add a little bit thicker yellow ochre as well if you want to blend that in. And this is how you sort of take that mushroom up a little bit. So make it a little bit more three-dimensional. So in theory, you're sort of mixing on the paper. I'm going to go back in and just do a bit darker at the edges. I mean, it all depends what you mushroom. What's that? Sorry.
Is that burnt sienna or?
The one that all I'm using here is I haven't actually used the burnt sienna yet, so I'm just using the ochre and the burnt umber, and I'm just sort of mixing those in and dotting them around. What I would like to do though is just seal off that. I don't really want that fuzzy line. So as you can see, that's sort of coming. You mix it. You're mixing these colours, you know, wet in wet on the on the paper. And as usual with watercolour, we have to let it dry. But if your masking fluid's dry, mine's still not quite dry actually. I'll give it a bit of a waft. I mean, you can always go back in. Don't worry as well. I'll show you another trick. Well, it's not a trick, another technique. If you feel once this is dried that it's not dark enough, because obviously watercolour will dry lighter, whereas acrylic dries darker. There is another trick. We can wet it again to get the wet in wet technique. So I'll do that once I've done. Actually, what I'll do, I'll just do something else up here. I'll just create a circle of water up here and show you what I mean. So if I haven't had enough, I'll just leave that to do what it needs to do. Let it move around a little. And obviously you can go over it as well with glazes. I mean, this is just the wet in wet technique. So if you wanted to go over it with a glaze afterwards, you know, keep doing that. But I think the purpose of this exercise is really to try and work in wet and wet as much as possible. But you know, if you go over the glaze, then you go over the glaze. That's watercolor, really. You use both as a rule, don't you? So. It's still not quite dry, unfortunately. But we're going to use the same methodology for the mushroom. Apart from when we get on the inside, we're going to make a grey, which we can sort of do because we've got the masking fluid as a breakwater. Because when you come to do your mushroom still life, then what I would suggest you did, like for example, when I did this, I painted this mushroom and then this mushroom and then this mushroom, if you see what I mean. So there was always some breakwater in the middle. While one was drying, I was able to do that. And you know, when you're planning a watercolor painting, obviously that's what you sort of have to do. You think, okay, well, while that's drying, what can I do? You know, that's how you're supposed to plan it. It doesn't always go to plan, I don't find, but anyway. So where's my brush? Okay, so it's the same instance on the big mushroom. That we coat that in water. Just the mushroom area. Well, the top of the mushroom area, where it curls under.
Yeah, people just that's it. and you know it's.
Is that how you do your toothpaste, Jane?
Yeah.
Squeezing it from the bottom?
Has to be.
Somebody else might know.
I've got a little gadget like a key.
Oh, yeah.
I'm just an animal. I'll just squeeze it from anywhere.
Oh,
I always find mine like a hard container because I can't stand squeezing.
Actually, if you buy these a lot of them now, they're soft, so they just pop back anyway. They're not like
Well, my favourite is to cut the bottom off because there's so much won't come out that's left in the tube.
Tip from the top, Roy.
What did you say, sorry?
With these plastic tubes, there's an awful lot left in.
Yeah.
When you can't get it out, so I cut the end off.
yeah.
Yeah.
Do that with makeup as well, right?
Well, yeah, I don't use a lot of makeup. Only at the weekends.
We can possibly do the stem as well. So the stem is just a. I didn't use a wet in wet technique. I just put little marks for the stem when I did the stem. I'm using the same colours. Let them sort of meld into each other. It's quite off, but the colour of the masking fluid always is quite off. Oh gosh, sorry, I got a big blob there. It's always quite off-putting. It's that sort of bluey. Very nice. And when I was saying about the this area here that's going to be grey, we if we mix the burnt umber and ultramarine. We should get quite a healthy grey. A little bit on the purpley side, but it's as you can see, it's quite a nice grey. So we dilute that quite a lot. So we don't want it too predominant, I don't think. And then because my masking fluid's there, I can actually go in there and add some of that there. And I should have wet my paper first. Sorry about that. So just wet your paper first. Sorry, I didn't wet on wet this. But because I didn't do that, what I'll do, I'll just take my brush. I'll take a little bit of a wettish brush, and I can just do that around the sides. If you can see that flowing. And then it's the waiting game again. Unfortunately, we have to wait for it to dry. So is everybody okay? Has anybody got any questions? No? Okay. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to pause the video because we are actually now literally watching paint dry. Again. So I think now that we're dry, I think I'm dry now. So what I'm going to do is, with a bit of a smaller brush, I'm going to take my my burnt umber ultramarine mix and just put a little glaze on. Just put that just around there.
Sorry, what colour is that?
Oh, this is the burnt umber ultramarine colour. So I'm just putting a little bit just around that edge. So you can either do, you can do wet in wet if you wanted to, or you can do you can do like I'm doing as a glaze, just to make that edge just that little bit darker. And then, if you want to spread it out, you can either do wet in wet, like I said, or the little trick is to get the nice sort of damp brush and just give it a little play at the end, and then that helps it blend a little bit too. So I quite like that. And what we want to do once that's dry, oh, actually, what we'll do, I'll go around. We can work on the top of the mushroom now, just with a few of those lines. Are those lines got in? I don't suppose they have, have they? But so all I'm using here is the yellow ochre again, but obviously as a glaze, and I'm just trying to give that feeling of that three-dimensional sort of curve. I'm terrible. I don't. I'm too rigid when I do when I do random strokes like this. They're always they always seem evenly spaced, and it drives me mad. And I have to always think, be random, be random, be random. It drives me nuts. You know, when you're doing like dots and things, and they're always too regimented. And also at the base of the stem, we can put that grey wash as well. Just going back to this one here. So this one's dry now. You know, I was saying if you haven't done enough wet in wet for your liking, you can let that dry, like we've let this dry here, and then just go over it with some water. And you know that will be in place because it's not going to go anywhere. And then we can start dropping colours on again. Yeah. Can you see that? And that works just as well. So because the problem with wet in wet, once it gets to a stage where it's starting to dry, then you can't touch it. You can't touch it because you're going to end up pooling. The reason being, I don't know if anyone's aware of this, but just for those of you who aren't, the water seeks the equilibrium. So if it dries, for example, if it's sort of wet by here and it's dry by here, the water will stop here. So it will stop where that puddle stops, you know, because obviously it's not going to dry in equilibrium, and then you'll get a quite harsh line. So that this is why we have to wet the whole thing in order to get that wet in wet sort of look again. But I quite like the second wet in wet. I always think it works quite well. Yeah, the first wet in wet, I feel too pressured. I don't know if anyone else feels the same, but I feel like this massive pressure to work fast, and oh my gosh, I've got to know all my colours, and I've got to know where they're all going to go, and you know. But bless you. But I think with this method, I don't know. I always feel a bit more confident.
A little tip I've learned recently when you're doing it, if you end up with a slightly hard edge,
Yeah.
if you brush in the water and just run it along the edge.
Yeah, well, definitely. That's what I was sort of trying to explain there, but possibly not very well.
I'm sorry. Maybe I was just concentrating on
No. But that's a really good little cheats way, and there's also as well, just while we're at it, is if you do go over the mark, if you do go over the highlight, for example. So I just paint that there, which you know. I presume most people know, but if you clean your brush, dry it off, and go in, you know, you can lift it out quite successfully. Also with a tissue, but that helps too. So all I'm doing now is just waiting for this area to dry, and then I'm going to put a few gills, stroke, what was it, Jackie? Striations, striations, I think, in, and I just realised that the microphone is really close to my water pot, so I do apologise if you're getting a lot of this. So really, once that's dry, you're happy with how the mushroom. Because the nice thing about wetting wet for a mushroom, I think, is it does a mushroom has got those sort of those gradients in there, those sort of like spready sort of gradients. So this, I think this technique works really well. Obviously, you know, this is just sort of floating around. We don't have any shadows or anything, so it doesn't always do it any justice. Give that a little fan, and then just with a small brush, take that small brush. I'll just do a few marks. I think that's dry. If it's not dry, I do apologise, but just do a few marks for these gills. Just with that burnt umber. So it's just a little glaze, really. So with that dry underneath, or what I hope is dry, I'm just bringing that the same colour in again. And if you feel that you know, any point that it's not dark enough, because obviously this is like a hypothetical mushroom. I'm not. I have got a mushroom here, but I'm not drawing that. If you feel like you want to put a little bit more shadow in there, then do so, just to try and make that 3D effect. And that's it, apart from the fact, obviously, we want to take off the masking fluid, but we need to let all the paint dry for that. So are there any questions anybody's got at all? You know, if you have, then obviously we can I can address those on the video as well if necessary, for those who aren't here. No, is everybody okay? Good. Oh. just for the video, actually. I'm just going to mention, Susan was concerned. I don't think we had the video the video turned on. When you mix the burnt umber and the ultramarine. Now, we were talking about, you know, how much you mix together, because it can look a little bit green, but just take a little bit away and make sure you put it onto a piece of paper. Then you'll see exactly what colour you actually have when you sort of pull it away from the main body of the colour, because it depends how much you mix up, really, I suppose. So that worked okay in the end. I think that's the only comment I have. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to pause the recording again and wait for this to dry. Okay, so now the masking fluid should be dry. So I'm going to take that off. So I'm just going to rub it. You can rub it with a tissue, obviously. But this sort of makes quite the difference. So I'd like to think. And if there's anything that you want to pick up on, you think, oh, actually, that's too white or anything, then now is your chance. So that, everyone, is the mushroom. Okay. So thank you very much. Okay.